I learned early that exile can wear 1,000 faces. Cold doors, whispered accusations, a hand on your shoulder that guide you into darkness like it's mercy. But the day my family decided I was a traitor, it wore one face over and over again: certainty. Their certainty was clean and polished, like they had rehearsed it until it sounded like truth. They didn't drag me into the night with chains. That would have been honest. They led me into the hall under lantern light and candle warmth, where everyone could pretend they were civilized while my life was decided like a coin toss. My mother's lips moved first, always my mother, even when she'd already made her choice. My father stood to her side, eyes steady, as if he could not possibly understand the shape of my fear. Vespera, my aunt said, soft enough to soothe. The name didn't feel like mine anymore. You've been passing messages. You've been treason. The word landed like iron in my chest. I tried to speak. I tried to breathe around the panic. But my voice kept getting caught in the places where guilt was supposed to live. The accusation came with details, too specific to be invented, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. They described how I had walked near the boundary trees. They described the sound of my footsteps at night. They described a note I supposedly delivered, an item I'd never touched, a seal I'd never broken. What made it worse was that they didn't have to believe me. They only needed the pack's fear to drown out my honesty. Our territory sat like a quilt of forest and stone around the border, thick with protective roots and watchful wolves. Human things were forbidden. No strangers, no cross-blood. Humans weren't just enemies. They were poison to the old wards. Even the idea of them near our land could get a young one dragged away. So when they claimed I traded secrets to an outsider, they knew exactly how to make my existence monstrous. By the time the elders finished, I was already being judged by eyes that refused to look at me as a person. I was a story they could tell. The next generation, I was a lesson. My little brother, my small brother, with ink-dark lashes and a laugh that used to embarrass him when he tried to hide it, stared at me like I was a threat. He didn't say a word, he just watched. That silence felt like betrayal, carved deeper than any accusation. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed awake, listening for footsteps that didn't belong. I thought of the times I'd followed injured wolves to the tree line and cleaned their wounds with herbs even the elders said were too human. I thought of how I had made myself useful in ways no one applauded, only accepted. And still, on the day I needed them to see me, I had nothing but rumors. They brought me to the dungeon because it was secure. Secure means deep enough that your hope can't climb back out. Secure means cold stone and the stink of old fear. Secure means you don't get to argue when the guards decide your fate. The dungeon smelled like damp earth and something metallic like blood that had dried too many times. Iron bars glimmered under torchlight. The guards didn't touch me roughly. Not exactly. Their restraint was its own cruelty. They treated me like I would be grateful to be ignored. I paced at first, because movement gives the mind something to cling to. The stone floor was slick with moisture. When I knelt, my palms left dark prints that looked like charcoal. I tried to pray to the old spirits, but the words kept tangling with my anger. Why would my family do this? Why would they decide my life was negotiable? I kept returning to my aunt's careful tone, the way she'd said Vesper like she was naming a mistake. Then another thought wormed in, sharp as a thorn. Maybe I wasn't the target. Maybe I was the weapon. If they could make the pack afraid of me, they could push their own secret agendas under the safety of my disappearance. I'd heard whispers before about the council's meetings. I'd caught fragments of talk about a sealed lineage, about forbidden powers, about an old vow tied to bloodlines that weren't supposed to exist. At the time, I told myself it was superstition. In the dungeon, superstition felt like an accomplice. Days passed in a way that didn't feel like time. It felt like being suspended over a pit and told not to look down. Each time the torch flame flickered, I imagined someone deciding whether to bring me bread or silence. My stomach shrank. My body began to ache in quiet, stubborn places. Yet I didn't give in. My power, if it was, power had always been ordinary on the surface. I could feel the tremor of magic in living things. I could smell lies when they clung to the throat. I could breathe in a way that calmed a frightened animal. People called it sensitivity. People called it luck. But in the dungeon, I started to notice what I had ignored before. When I pressed my palm to the cold stone, I could sense the wards beneath it. Not just their boundaries, how they fought, how they responded to certain magic tones like my own. My fingertips tingled as if the stone recognized me. So I did what I'd always done when fear tried to steal my mind. I worked, I watched, I listened, I tested. I hummed softly at first, because sound is a thread that can pull you back from panic. The hum rose from my ribs, steady as a heartbeat. The air in the dungeon vibrated. Dust shivered off the bars. Somewhere above, my humming stirred a sound like a distant animal shifting in its sleep. I kept humming until my throat burned, until my tongue tasted iron, until the wards stopped feeling like an impenetrable wall and started feeling like an instrument waiting for the right note. That was the first awakening. Small, but real. The second awakening came the night the dungeon door opened. Boots scraped, chains rattled, the guard's voice cut through the damp air, clipped and cautious. Make it clean. The humans aren't allowed. We'll move her only as far as what? Only as far as the border. Only as far as a rumor could be contained. The dungeon's torchlight tilted. Someone stepped inside, and the air changed. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't kindness. It was pressure like standing too close to a storm. When the hooded man revealed himself, I understood instantly why my family had panicked at the thought of outsiders. This wasn't the soft, village-level kind of threat. This was the kind that had teeth and rules. Kale. I didn't know his name at first, only the way the guards moved around him, how they lowered their chins, how their hands didn't fidget, how even in the presence of their own steel, they looked like they were waiting for permission to breathe. His gaze didn't skim, it weighed. He looked at me like I was a problem he hadn't solved yet. My lungs seized for a moment, not with fear alone but with something else, the sudden awareness that he smelled different forest wild, cold river stone, something ancient threaded through his scent, like history in the marrow. He didn't speak immediately. Then he said, low and deliberate, treason on our border carries a particular stench. I stared at him, throat tight. I didn't do it. My voice cracked on the first word. I hated that it sounded like begging. He shifted, and the guards tensed as if he'd drawn a blade without moving his hand. Words are cheap. Truth isn't. I expected laughter. I expected cruelty. Instead, Kale tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to an animal that didn't know it was being measured. You hum. The confession slipped out of me before I could stop it. I didn't want to die. His eyes narrowed, but the narrowing wasn't hostile. It was intent. Then, from behind him, the sound of many paws, soft, careful, rolled through the hall. Wolves, not the frightened guard dogs people, sometimes used as warnings. These were pack wolves, massive shapes pressing against stone like they belonged to it. The air filled with their scent, dark fur, pine sap, hunger tempered by discipline. Kael'th raised a hand, not to silence them, but to command them into stillness. His command travelled through the pack like a current. I stood with a jerk, because if I was going to face this, I would not be small. I saw something in the way the nearest wolf watched me. Not curiosity, not dominance, recognition. It stared as if it could feel a thread inside me connecting to something ancient in its bones. Kael's mouth tightened. Stand. The command wasn't meant for me alone. It was meant for the dungeon itself. The bars didn't move, but the world seemed to obey his will. The guards unlocked the door. Cold air surged in. For a moment, I thought they'd drag me out to the place where traitors were disposed of, but instead, they guided me up toward the edge of the territory, toward the boundary that humans were forbidden to enter. Kael walked beside me, close enough that I could feel his heat through my skin, close enough that my mind kept searching his expression for what my family had hidden from me, whether he planned to believe me. He didn't answer my questions. He didn't grant me kindness. But the wolves followed with a strange loyalty, forming a moving wall around my body as we crossed into the forest path. My fear tried to flare again. If he'd come for my head, why bring a whole pack? As the light shifted from torch to moon, I noticed the boundary stones, etched with old symbols, and sealed in ways that made my hum vibrate in my throat. When I stepped near them, the wards reacted. They didn't just hold back. They recognized. I took in a shaky breath. My hum wanted to come back. My power wanted to unfold. Kael's gaze tracked me. Your magic touches ward work. It's not magic like stories, I said quickly. I'd learned that when people wanted your power, they called it myth. When they wanted to punish you, they called it crime. He studied me, as if measuring the line between those definitions. Then, the wolves at my sides shifted, and I felt it, something in the ground answering them. Kael stopped. His pack stopped too. The air held still. In the silence I heard it. The faintest echo of a voice, not spoken, but carried through vibration, through ward work, a warning, a promise. Kael's eyes hardened, and his beast, whatever lived beneath his skin, stirred behind his expression. I didn't see it as anger. I saw it as restraint. He was being pulled by the same hidden forces I was. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt something like hope, but it came with caution. I'd learned hope gets you hurt. We reached the place where the dungeon chain ended and exile began. There, the air was colder, and the trees grew denser. My family's scent clung to my memory like smoke. I pictured them in the hall with their polished certainty. And I wondered what their version of the story would look like now. Kael didn't send me back. He didn't hand me over to my accusers. He did something far more dangerous. He kept me, not as his mate, not as his friend, not as his possession, as a living question. The palace, if you could call a fortress of stone and timber, a palace, rose beyond the trees. No humans allowed within its boundaries. Even the servants wore thick protections that shimmered when magic shifted. They brought me into a hall where the ceiling was carved with old knots and protective runes. Torches burned without smoke. The scent of herbs and iron mingled. Kael stood at a distance, and his pack moved in controlled arcs. The silence between us was heavy enough to suffocate. Then he said, "You will not speak to the guards unless asked." "I didn't know I could," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. His stare sharpened. "You can learn." I should have backed down. Instead, I swallowed and nodded, as if I accepted the rules. Agency isn't only about refusing. Sometimes it's about surviving long enough to choose your next move. I watched the palace carefully. Every door, every corridor, every guard, every wolf. I learned how their attention shifted when I hummed, how the air responded, how runes lit faintly along the walls. It didn't take long to understand that my humming wasn't just a habit. It was a key. They tried to break my key. On the first day, a guard brought me water and bread, but kept a distance that felt like contempt. They acted as if proximity to me could contaminate them. I stood when the platter arrived, because refusing would look like guilt. Shares, it is. I ate slowly. I let them see I could be calm. Then I noticed the wolf, near the hearth. Its flank bore a scar that looked too fresh. Its breathing was shallow. Not injured enough for obvious suffering, but injured enough that its strength had been stolen. The wolf watched me as if it already knew I would fix what was broken. I didn't approach it like a hero. I approached like a woman doing something ordinary. I sat near the hearth with my back straight and my hands folded, hum starting low. I didn't force the wolf to come closer. I simply made my hum, gentle enough to say, "I'm not here to threaten you." The wolf's ears flicked. It stood carefully and limped one step closer. That small step was a victory. I didn't ask permission. I didn't fight anyone. I pulled a small pouch of herbs from my pocket, the ones I'd hidden during transfer, because I'd known someone would try to take my tools. I ground them with a stone, careful, and mixed them with a bit of water. I cleaned the wolf's wound without drama, no speeches, no tears. When my fingers touched the torn skin, the wolf flinched once, then relaxed. Caleb watched from across the hall. His face remained unreadable. But the pack's posture shifted, like a line of guards turning their heads in unison. Caleb didn't move closer, but his beast did. I felt it before I saw it, a pressure rolling through the air, a protective instinct aimed not at stopping me, but at making sure I survived the consequences of helping. Later, when my hands were clean and my hum had faded into silence, Caleb spoke from a distance. "You heal what you shouldn't have access to." I wiped my palms on a cloth, keeping my posture firm. "You gave me access to it." His eyes flashed, not anger, interest. The kind of interest that could become threat if I wasn't careful. "What do they call you?" he asked. My stomach twisted. "They called me a traitor." His gaze didn't leave my face. "Not here." Something about the way he said, "not here," made my chest ache, like he was drawing a boundary around my shame. But he didn't erase it. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He just allowed me to stand inside a different story. The next betrayal came from within his territory. A rival envoy arrived, disguised as an ally, trailing scent that made my nose sting. I recognized it from whispers I'd heard in my own clan. The rival pack didn't just want land, it wanted leverage. It wanted Caleb distracted long enough for the borders to crack. They announced themselves loudly, forcing the hall to bend around them. Caleb's wolves bristled. I stayed seated, hum low, because I refused to act like I was afraid of their presence. Fear makes you predictable. Calm makes you dangerous. The rival envoy looked at me like I was a trophy he could claim. "Who is she to you, Alpha King?" I felt my body stiffen. If I answered wrong, they'd use it. If I stayed silent, they'd call it guilt. Either way, they planned to turn me into a weapon. Against Caleb. Caleb didn't answer immediately. His beast paced behind his ribs like it wanted to tear the hall apart. But the pack's restraint mattered. It told me Caleb wasn't giving in to rage. He was choosing control, slow, deliberate control. He finally spoke, voice like stones sliding into place. "She is under protection of the pack." The rival envoy laughed softly. "Protection doesn't make her innocent." I stared at him. "No," I said quietly, "but it gives her time." The envoy's smile tightened. "Time for what?" "For." I met Caleb's gaze without flinching, and in that moment, I made a decision. I would not be a pawn. If I had to be trapped in danger, then I would, at least, become the kind of woman who turns danger into an advantage. "Time to prove the truth," I said. Caleb's eyes darkened. He didn't say agreement or refusal, but the wolves around the hall settled, like they had heard something they recognized as worth guarding. After the envoy left, after the rival scent faded into distance, the palace's mood changed. Caleb called for a private meeting in the old archives, where wardwork histories were stored, like prayers. I was brought along, not in chains, but in firm, controlled supervision. The guards expected me to break. I didn't. As we entered the archive, I saw books sealed in rune wax. I saw carved bone charms. I saw maps of territories marked with protective sigils. But there, under a layer of dust, I saw something that made my breath hitch. A record, stamped with my family crest. My stomach dropped. I hadn't been framed with random lies. Someone had used official documentation. Someone had planted evidence and made it look like the truth. My hands shook as I pulled the record free. The wax seal cracked with a dry sound that felt too loud in the quiet. Kael'th watched me, his voice low. Read. I shouldn't have needed permission. But I read anyway, because if I was going to survive, I needed to understand who wrote the lie. The record described a set of hidden markers, ward, keys, linked to my bloodline. It claimed I had used those markers to open a human forbidden route. My vision blurred. That route had never existed for me. Not unless someone gave me the knowledge first. Not unless someone hid my power from me. My mind flashed with memories I'd dismissed as imagination. How my hum had once made frightened animals calm. How my scent sometimes drew wolves like a call. How I'd always felt like there was more beneath my ordinary abilities. The record wasn't only an accusation, it was a confession. Who wanted what? Kael'th leaned closer. The air between us tightened. His pack waited outside the archive, but I could feel their attention, like a tether. What do you know? He asked. I swallowed. They used my bloodline. They used my key. Kael'th's jaw tightened. And why would your family do that? The answer rose in me like bile. Because my family had never feared my power. They had feared what it meant. Because hidden powers don't come from nowhere. They come from lineage. And lineage carries destiny. My family wanted to control destiny. They couldn't control mine. So they tried to erase it. That night, they threw me into a new cell. Not the dungeon again. This was worse in a different way. This cell was closer to the old ward work, surrounded by carved symbols that hummed faintly even when the torches died. It felt like the building itself wanted me to wake something. Kael'th didn't appear. The guards left me alone. At first, I thought it was abandonment. Then I heard the wolves, not inside the cell, outside the walls. Their howls weren't frantic. They were low and rhythmic-like, a language, a warning, or a promise. I pressed my palm to the stone again. The wardwork responded immediately, faster than before, as if it had been waiting for permission to reveal itself through my blood. My hum rose without effort. My vision sharpened. I saw faint lines of light beneath the stone, like nerves. Every line connected to another symbol, each one a piece of a larger mechanism. The hidden power wasn't only in healing animals or calming fears. It was in binding wardwork to intent. I could feel the mechanism of the pack's territory, its protections, its choke points, its secrets, and I could feel something else. A seal, a sealed corridor below the archive that should not exist. A corridor linked to the accusation. I had been brought here so the wardwork could test me. Or so someone could use the test as a trap. I didn't know which, but I refused to be passive. I adjusted my hum, shaping it the way my grandmother used to shape herbs. Small changes that create entirely different effects. The ward lines brightened. The stone under my palm warmed. A click sounded somewhere below. My heart hammered. The corridor was waking, and with it, the truth would leak into the open air. The next moment, the corridor opened with a sound like breath being released from a tomb. Cold mist curled up through cracks in the stone. Light flickered. Then the guards rushed in, shouting orders, faces pale. One of them shouted, "Shut it! Shut it now!" But it was already too late. A smell hit me, old paper and blood, a human forbidden scent. My mind flashed back to the record I'd read, to planted evidence, to the seal. I stepped toward the crack as mist rolled around my ankles. My knees threatened to buckle, not from weakness, from the intensity of the power awakening inside me. My power wasn't a weapon meant for violence. It was a truth that refused to stay buried. When I reached into the mist, my fingers touched something solid, a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were the missing pieces, sealed notes, travel tokens, forged witness marks, evidence. Someone had hidden it beneath the archive. All along. Not my family. No. Someone within Kael'th's world had fed the lie forward, used my family's crest as a mask, and prepared the accusation like a ritual. I stared at the cloth bundle, hands trembling. The truth hurt, because it meant I hadn't only been betrayed by my family, I'd been baited by people who wanted to destabilize the pack from the inside. I looked up at the guards. Their eyes weren't just afraid of the corridor, they were afraid of me. I stood straighter. You kept this here because you needed it to work. One guard stammered, Alpha King. Another lunged toward the bundle, but the wolves outside surged forward at the same time, their bodies blocking the guards from reaching me. No one told them to. They reacted because their instincts recognized the stakes. Kael'th arrived then, silent and commanding, his presence cutting through the mist. He looked at the evidence in my hands. He looked at the wardwork lines glowing faintly around my wrists. He looked at my face. His beast pressed at the surface, pacing, like it wanted to take me somewhere safe. But his eyes stayed steady. He didn't accuse me. He didn't tell me I was broken, he asked. Did you plant this? My breath caught. He didn't ask it like a trap. He asked it like he already had a different story forming, and he needed confirmation. I shook my head. I didn't even know the corridor existed until tonight. Something shifted behind his gaze, so subtle most people would miss it. The pack tightened around me, but not in a cage, in a circle. When Kael'th spoke again, his voice dropped. Then why does the wardwork choose you? My throat burned. I wanted to tell him everything at once. The hall, my family's certainty, my brother's silence, the way the dungeonaire had stolen my strength. But I didn't give him a speech. I gave him the truth in fragments. I hum, I said. I listen. I help animals who bleed. They asked me to be ordinary. So I learned to be ordinary well. His jaw tightened. His pack's ears angled toward me, as if they understood the shape of my words. And I learned, I continued, that someone made ordinary tools into a crime. Kael'th stared at me for a long moment. Then, without stepping closer, he lifted his hand. The wardwork lines around my wrists dimmed slightly, like the mechanism had acknowledged his authority. He'd learned to guide it. That was the slow part of him. His walls, coming down one stone at a time. He told the guards to retrieve records, to track the courier scent that had brought forged tokens. He ordered his own wolves to question witnesses near the archive. No one dragged me back to a cell. They brought me food, warm broth, fresh bread. It smelled like herbs. And safety. I ate while the pack watched. They didn't leer, they guarded. My family's accusation felt like a distant bruise, now still there, still tender, but no longer in charge. The investigation lasted 2 weeks that felt like a lifetime. I didn't lounge. I didn't wait for rescue. I worked. I hummed near suspicious wards to see how they responded. I walked the corridors where guards swore their evidence had been found. I listened for the telltale stickiness of lies, how they clung to the air like oil. Kael'th watched from places he thought I couldn't notice, in the way his wolves shifted when I approached. I saw his attention, in the way his beast restrained itself. When a guard tried to insult me, I felt the limits of his cruelty. He could have destroyed the messenger who'd framed me. Instead, he wanted proof. Because Kael'th wasn't only strong, he was controlled. On the final day, they dragged in a witnessome one from inside his territory. A scribe who had signed my family's crest on false documents. His hands trembled as he stood before Caleb's throne. I watched from the edge of the hall with my shoulders squared. The scribe tried to speak, but his voice broke into fragments. The notes were already prepared. I was told it was for stability. For stability, I echoed, and my voice cut through the hall. Caleb's head turned. His eyes met mine. And for the first time since the dungeon, I saw something in him that wasn't only command, it was choice. He stepped closer, not to dominate, but to close the distance. The wolves eased their circle just enough to let him reach my side. He didn't touch my face. He didn't claim me. He just stood close enough that his presence warmed the cold parts of me. "Say her name correctly," he told the scribe. The scribe swallowed. Vespera. The name sounded clean in Caleb's mouth, like he had washed away the poison my family had poured into it. I felt my throat tighten, not with sentimentality, with anger and relief braided together. The scribe revealed the final truth. Someone had planned to unseal a corridor that could invite forbidden elements into the territory. Someone had wanted the pack weakened by internal conflict and fear. My family crest had been used because my bloodline made the wards react. Not because I was treason, because I was the key. When the scribe finished, the room went silent. Caleb's beast paced behind his ribs. I could feel it like thunder under snow, but he didn't unleash it on me. He unleashed it on the lie. That was his transformation, too. The moment his walls came down enough to let truth in, he ordered the corridor sealed permanently. He ordered the corrupted ward symbols destroyed. He ordered new records written with honest seals. And then he turned to me. The pack's attention narrowed to me like a spotlight. No one else breathed. Caleb's voice lowered. "You will leave the dungeon no longer." I stiffened slightly. "I'm not leaving because you decide I'm worthy." His eyes didn't flinch. Then, because the territory asked. That sentence struck me. Because it wasn't only him, it was the wards, it was the pack, it was something deeper than authority. I swallowed hard, feeling the vulnerability of being chosen when you've been betrayed. It felt dangerous to hope. But I couldn't deny the evidence in my hands, the truth in my veins. The way the wolves watched me, like I belonged in their story. Caleb stepped back, giving me space to breathe. The gesture mattered. It told me he believed in my agency. It told me he wasn't taking, he was offering. Later that night, he allowed me into the gardens behind the fortress, moonlit, quiet, protected by old roots that hummed softly in response to my voice. The forbidden human scent was gone. The air smelled only like leaf and earth and the sweet bite of pine. I stood near the water pool, hands still ink-stained from copying new ward records. My magic had left faint, shimmering lines on my knuckles. Caleb approached without rushing. His pack followed at a distance, restless but restrained. He stopped a few steps away. "You were thrown away," he said. I didn't correct him. I didn't soften him. Yes, the word tasted bitter. He studied the moonlight on the water, then on my hair. "You didn't beg." I laughed once, sharp and surprised by my own sound. "Begging is how liars win." His gaze lifted. I felt something like a shift in my heart, pain uncoiling into strength. "I didn't need you to save me," I admitted, voice quieter. "I needed someone to let me prove I wasn't made of guilt." Caleb's beast stirred, and I felt it move closer to the surface, like a curtain being pulled aside. He didn't say affection. He said, "I will not let them use you again." That promise could have sounded like ownership. But the way he said it, careful, measured, respectful, of the distance I kept, made it feel like a vow to protect my autonomy. My chest tightened. I remembered the Hall of Lanterns and my family's certainty. I remembered how they had spoken my life like a verdict. Ceolf hadn't made me into a verdict. He had made me into a truth. I turned toward him and let my hum start again, low and steady. The roots around us vibrated, as if the garden itself was joining the song. Ceolf's eyes sharpened. "What are you doing?" he asked. But the question sounded less like suspicion and more like wonder. "I'm listening," I said, "to see if your territory answers you the way it answers me." His jaw flexed. Then he lowered his head, slightly, as if submitting to the rhythm. His beast calmed, like it had found the note it had been missing. The wolves around us settled. One by one, they lay down in the grass, paws tucked, eyes closing without fear. Ceolf's restraint became a kind of gentleness. I saw it in the way he watched me hum, not as a spectacle, but as if my ordinary act was becoming something sacred. And then the garden light shifted, hidden wards woke. Subtle, delicate runes under the stone that glowed like pale embers. Oh, the wards didn't just recognize me, they recognized him. It was as if the territory itself had decided we were no longer mismatched pieces. I felt it, an invisible link, a resonance that traveled between my blood and his wardwork-bound fate. Not a sudden claiming, not a magical slap of destiny, a slow acknowledgement. Ceolf's gaze held mine, and his voice dropped to something nearly silent. "You aren't only healing the pack." I swallowed, fear flickering because I'd seen what destiny could do to women who didn't know they were being used. "What am I?" I asked. His beast paced once, then stilled. He answered carefully, as if he knew the cost of wrong words. "You are the piece that makes the seal hold." My heart hammered. I understood then. The accusation wasn't only about treason. It was about preventing me from fulfilling the wardwork bond, preventing me from sealing something dangerous. Someone had wanted the corridor open. Someone had wanted chaos. And someone had been willing to turn my family against me to do it. I stared at Ceolf, anger rising again. But now it wasn't only hurt, it was purpose. I would protect the seal, I would protect the pack, and I would protect myself. Ceolf stepped closer, just one pace. His hand hovered, not touching, waiting for me to decide. I breathed in his scent, forest stone, and old control. I breathed out my fear. Then I placed my palm against his wrist. His skin was warm, his pulse steady. The ward link flared faintly, and the air around us shimmered like moonlight on water. Ceolf's eyes darkened, and his beast finally rested, not as a monster, but as a guardian. I didn't feel claimed. In the days that followed, Ceolf didn't rush romance like a conquest. He changed how he moved through his world. He listened. He asked my opinion before ordering anything that would affect my life. He let me correct him when I sensed an untruth in a plan. When the pack's elders tried to bring me before them like an item to be catalogued, Ceolf shifted his body between me and their gaze. He didn't threaten them. He simply made their access conditional. He turned their curiosity into respect. When my family came, seeking reconciliation after the proof destroyed their credibility, I didn't forgive them on command. I looked at them as people who had burned my life for their own stability. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I simply stood with my head high and said, "You don't get to rewrite what you did." The pack's atmosphere supported me. Even my accusers felt the weight of being watched by wolves that didn't believe in their lies anymore. That was my transformation. Strength that didn't require violence. It required truth. And it required staying. Ceolf's walls came down slowly because he made sure they did. He let me see his quiet fears, the way his pack sometimes watched him like he was the only shield they trusted. He let me understand that his authority wasn't a crown, it was a burden. In return, I let him see my quiet wounds, the moments I flinched when voices sounded like verdicts, the nights I thought I would die in stone. We healed each other in ways neither could control. One night, after the seal was reaffirmed through ward work, only I could perform, Kael'th brought me to the top of the fortress where the stars looked close enough to touch. The wind threaded through my hair and carried the scent of distant rain. The wolves lounged below, calm. Kael'th stood beside me, not towering, just present. My hum rose softly, less like a key now, and more like a lullaby. I could feel the bond in my blood, the seal in the earth, the pack's shared heartbeat. Kael'th's voice came out low, roughened by something honest. I have lived behind walls for so long. I didn't let him turn it into a confession of desire. I answered with my own truth. So have I, he exhaled, as if the night itself had loosened a knot inside him. Then he finally touched me, not grabbing, not claiming. He took my hand and pressed his thumb gently against my scar, near my collarbone, like he was reading the history of my survival. I closed my eyes. No thunder, no conquest, just warmth. My heart cracked open like a bud, not in bloom of whim, but in acceptance. Because I'd learned something in his world. Love didn't need to be loud to be real. It needed to be safe. Kael'th's beast stayed calm beside me, protective instead of possessive. The pack's eyes held steady, as if they were witnessing a new order of truth. I turned my face toward him and let my hum soften into silence. In that quiet, the bond tightened, stronger, steadier. Destiny fulfilled wasn't a twist that arrived like lightning. It was a choice, repeated every day, to stay, to protect, to heal, to build. And when the dawn finally rose over the pack territory, over ward stones, over forbidden lines, over corridors that were sealed for good, I knew I wasn't broken anymore. I was chosen, I was transformed. And I belonged, not because the world decided it for me, but because I proved who I was, and the Alpha King's pack recognized the truth first.